Hello everybody, this is ManuS and welcome to another Eternal Contenders video. So today I got something kinda cool and fresh and interesting for you. Another deck with some new cards from the Dead REckonign that I have been messing around with the last couple of days and had some pretty good results with. I sort of called it the Rebellion's Warcry, quite flavorfully fitting the campaign actually. But you can probably just call it like Rakano midrange or Rakano Valkyries, which is a bit easier. Alright, let's take a look at the deck. This is the deck. It's basically a Valkyrie, Sower of Dissent themed Rakano midrange deck, curving all the way up to Icaria. The deck runs mostly units, 32 to be exact. It has 4, 8, 12, 16, 20 Valkyries to support Sower of Dissent and Valkyrie Spireguard, and also to some extent be buffed by Icaria, Valkyrie Captain, and to make good use of Rolant's intervention. I'll talk about that in a moment. So the deck has 8 2-drops. Icaria Valkyrie Captain turned out to be much better than she looks on paper. I started trying her a bunch and was quite positively surprised how nicely she plays out in a deck like this. So I started like messing around with decks like this with like the Valkyrie core. And yeah, I quite liked her. So she's doing some nice work. She also happens to synergize with Unseen Commando and be a 2-drop Valkyrie to curve Sower of Dissent into to get the Warcry going on turn 4. The other unit is Copperhall Porter. That's the probably the card that I'm least sure about in the deck. That's my most recent change that I tried. This used to be a Force Daisho, a Justice Sigil, and 2 Privilege of Rank. But I wanted to try and change that, both because Privilege of Rank is a bit slow and clunky, and also because Copperhall Porter seems like a nice balance between virtually having 1 card more that can give you power, although only 1 power while Privilege gives you 2. So it sort of, while also doing something else, so it sort of should make the deck flood and screwless. But I haven't had the chance to play enough with it to be sure how much I like the Copperhall Porter. So if you don't end up liking it, just go back to what I just suggested. And the 4 Valkyrie Captains. You sometimes play on 2 and ultimate on 3, or just play on 2 and ultimate on 4 or 5 when you have nothing else to do, or can pair it with another card in the same turn. And sometimes you just hold back on her, especially against, say, Varus Favor, till you have 5 power, and then you just play and activate her to, for example, ramp from 5 to 7 for your Icaria. And possibly even immediately turning her on and or buffing your Icaria and some other stuff. Sower of Dissent is the whole point of the deck, basically. That's the card that made me build the deck, because I wanted to find a way to abuse this sort of card. Some of you might have already seen me messing around with the card in stream. And yeah, I think the card is really powerful. Warcry 2 this early from a single card is already really powerful, and then reducing cards like Amilli, Daisho, and Icaria by 2 and buffing them to 6/6 or 7/7 is a super big deal. Like basically if you play this attack on turn 4 and then turn 5 you draw a Daisho or an Icaria and you have the influence to play them immediately, that alone already basically wins you most games. And then we have 4 Unseen Commando, simply because the deck is a flyer heavy deck and has some units that synergize with it. And as silly as that sounds, the fact that Icaria becomes a 6/6 with Unseen Commando matters much more than you'd think, because there's a fair share of things like Shelterwing Rider and stuff like that, and Champion of Cunning without Shadow active that could otherwise trade with Icaria, and once she's a 6/6 she's much more problematic in combat for your opponent on offense, so that is actually a nice benefit. And yeah, Commando is just a great card, and also having your Commando Warcry on by a Sower or Icaria can also be game breaking. And Valkyrie Enforcer, one of the good Valkyries, a nice follow-up to Sower of Dissent to trigger the ally, and just a good Valkyrie to solve problems and just be a Valkyrie for the Valkyrie Matters cards. Then we have Valkyrie Spireguard. This card, if active, is really nice. A 4-cost 6/6 that doesn't deal you a damage, unlike Impending Doom, is a pretty big deal. Obviously the card is more vulnerable to silences and to spot removal, killing your other Valkyries. The deck wouldn't mind having a few more Valkyries to make Spireguard more reliable, but unfortunately there is no other Valkyries you'd want to play. So for now it has to be the way. It has to be this way, and it's also the only good 4-drop for this type of deck that I could find. Or really that exists, because I looked extensively and considered all the options. And then we have Amilli Cloudmarshal, in my opinion the most powerful and impactful card of the entire cycle. I think the card is a lot better than Worldbearer Behemoth in the end. Behemoth a lot of the time just turns out to be a 6/7 overwhelm for 5, because the ramp of Behemoth is pretty low impact, unless you have Mystic Ascendant usually, or playing big Combre where you also have other things. While Amilli, if Amilli attacked 2 or 3 times, you get 2 or 3 flying units if your opponent then shuts Amilli down. If your opponent shuts down your Behemoth after it attacked a couple times, all you have is a lot of power, more power than you can realistically use, usually at this point in the game. So I still think Amilli edges out Behemoth by a bit, just because flying and generating actual card value, while Behemoth doesn't, and Amilli is harder to raise because of the flying and because of the constant creation of blockers or jump blockers. Then we have Daisho. The whole point of Daisho in this deck basically is to be a massive payoff for Sower of Dissent and Icaria, as well as still being a decent card on its own. Like against control, it's one of the best cards together with Icaria in the deck. And against smaller aggro decks, it's a decent way to stabilize when you just stall them out with 1 or 2 blockers, but they're building a wider board to potentially threaten an Alpha Strike to still win. Then you can just Daisho, pick off some units, and suddenly they have no chance to ever push through your defenses, and then you just eventually win. Card is the worst against mid-range, clearly. That's where you need the buffs, otherwise the card is gonna be very low impact and a fair share of the time even dead. But it's still worth it. And last but not least, we have Icaria, the Liberator, the Rebel Leader, and another Valkyrie for the deck. And yeah, deck is chock full of Warcry targets, so the frequency of drawing your Icaria buff is pretty high after she started attacking, and a bunch of the targets are just like random units that can be answered by hard removal, but then you have the Daishos, and if you hit those, they are just game breaking. And I'm still not 100% sure that there shouldn't be a forced Daisho again, like I used to run. And then we basically have 4 Vanquish and 4 Torch as premium removal spells. Those 2 happen to be 2 of the best removal spells in the game right now, so that's pretty convenient. And then we have Rolant's Intervention, which actually is very flexible in this deck. The -3 can be a decent combat trick. The Aegis can protect the premium Valkyries, especially Spireguard and Amilli, and Icaria if the opponent tries to 2-for-1 themselves to take care of Icaria. And you can occasionally use it, for example, to turn a Daisho into a 5/5, because a 5/5 Daisho is that much more useful than a 4/4, and that's a nice use for the buff mode of the intervention. It will rarely happen, or rarely be the case, that you wanna buff another unit in your hand. Like very rarely you might wanna like give an Icaria +1/+1 to punch through a 5/5 blocker, for example, like a Magto or a Sheltering Rider or whatever. But you could just like break the Aegis of the Sheltering Rider with this. But yeah, +1/+1 is often a bit better than say giving the blocker -3 or popping the Aegis on the Sheltering, for example, because you're also dealing more damage and still blanking the opposing unit. And yeah, then there's 25 power. chose to not run any off-color crests for now, simply because the deck wants to curve out, and the crests happen to slow you down, since we already have the 4 Seeks as slow power and the Porter sort of. And the Waystones are actually pretty decent. The Granite Waystones provide jump blockers on the ground when racing in the air, and the Emerald Waystone can be very critical with Daisho, like getting 1 or 2 extra armor on a Daisho can make a big difference. But yeah, I couldn't fault anyone for trying to run a couple of crests. Maybe there should be like 2 to 4 off-color crests, but then you probably should cut down on the Waystones a bit. Because if you also cut down on the Sigils further, the seed's gonna become slower and the entire power base becomes pretty clunky and slow, basically. And you also need enough Sigils for Seek Power and Icaria and Porter, for example. Yeah, that's the deck list. The deck has been performing way better for me than it looks. Like, my first 30 games, I was on a whooping 24-6 run. 3 of the losses were just straight up non-games, where I just had a 2-power opening hand, redrew into a 2-power opening hand, never saw a 3rd power until it was too late and died. That can happen with like any deck, and is less likely to happen with a deck like this that has a fair share of power compared to like aggro decks with 25 power, or I don't know, mid-range decks that run less power. So it was just pretty unfortunate. And all the other games, I just when my deck drew a reasonable mix of power and non-power cards, I just kept steamrolling everything I faced, which was really weird, and I was like baffled by how well the deck performed. And even since then, my total record over 50 games is 35-15, which is still a great win rate, but still keep in mind the sample size is still fairly small, and it will probably drop below 70% after some time. I can't imagine this deck consistently performing at way above 70%. It just can't be that good. But yeah, the deck seems to have a lot of potential, and there seems to really be something there, so I can only recommend you try it. Also, it's kind of cool and fun, and uses some cool new cards, and yeah, it might also be a legit good deck. But yeah, that's why I put it under Eternal Contenders, because the sample size is still small, and I also can't really explain to myself how the deck is doing as well as it is. So there's a real chance that it's inflated by an upswing, basically. So yeah. But yeah, the deck definitely has potential, that much is certain. And as usual, gonna hop into some games in Ranked to show it in action, show you how it plays out, and hopefully we're gonna continue crushing. So stay tuned for the first game coming up next.